Our next panelist is Randy, who is here from KAIROS Canada. So this is the KAIROS Regina subgroup that put this together, but we're going to hear a little bit from the larger KAIROS community and lots of the work that they're doing and ways that they can continue to support us and engage with us. Thanks.
Hello, everybody. So I am the ecological justice coordinator for KAIROS. I've been doing that job for about 6 months, doing a replacement for maternity leave. So Beth Lorimer will be coming back in February. And if anybody wants to contact the ecological justice program, for now you're contacting me, but in February or March you'll be contacting Beth. I'm going to share my screen right now because I have a couple of things that I wanted to show. Oops, I'm going to have to move things around here. So this is a PowerPoint, and I've got a website as well. Can you see what I'm showing, the PowerPoint? Okay, great. So this is the orientation that I take in that as Christians, we're asking new questions about God's creation of old wisdom. And in the scriptures, we're finding that God does talk about, justice for all creation, the idea of reconciling all things. And that word in Greek that is translated into English as all things really does mean everything in creation. But it's probably not the way that we read those passages in that Christological hymn in Colossians. And we can see that throughout the Bible. If you go to the KAIROS website and go to the Ecological Justice Program, you'll see that in September, we did Climate Action Month, and we produced a lot of blogs. And one of the blogs is actually called Reading the Bible with Ecological Eyes. The theme of Climate Action Month was decolonizing climate action. And there's a lot of detail on that, including an advocacy campaign that I really strongly encourage you to participate in. There are several private members' bills before the House of Commons right now. One of those has a really strong chance of passing because even though it is proposed by a private member, it looks like it is supported by the government. And that's the bill on environmental racism and to create a national strategy on environmental justice, which would be absolutely amazing because Canada has nothing associated with environmental justice. And I can say, and would really emphasize, that social justice and ecological sustainability have to go hand in hand. We cannot have one without the other for lots of different reasons. And before I came on at KAIROS, I was a sociology professor at a Christian university in Alberta. And that was my main research area, actually, environmental justice and religion and climate change and these intersections. So I think the big question that we need to ask, and in this day, we've heard a lot of really, really good information on very practical and technical and detailed, how do we do things like, help our sacred spaces become more energy efficient and so forth. But we also need to ask the questions about how deep-seated cultural and social values can be addressed in order to reconstruct human relations with the earth. And I think that that's one of the things that in our faith, in our religion, in our theologies, we're trying to do. And that's something that Chris mentioned at the very beginning of today when he did the theological presentation. And Chris and I have worked together on some of these projects as well. And one of the reasons to say that, and one of the reasons to emphasize the benefit of faith communities is that it's really, our ideas come from our social networks. We really don't use an objective, fact-based analytic in the ways that we often think we do. We're really affected by those who are significant to us. In other words, our significant others. And so in the churches or in faith communities in general, I think there's a lot of obstacles, but also opportunities. So some of the obstacles would be things like worldview barriers. So for example, the world's not my home, I'm just passing through, or, our real goal is heaven, those kind of worldview barriers, or other theological sorts of things, but also the dispersion of attention. There are many issues to pay attention to. And that's one of the reasons that it's so important to link social justice and hunger with climate change, and poverty and social inequality with ecological degradation and environmental racism and so forth. And then also a bigger obstacle, which is not unique to faith communities, is a conviction to act. You know, what really influences our behavior? And it's not so much our ways of thinking and our values as much as, like I said, those people who are around us. But there's a lot of opportunities in faith communities. For example, we have worldviews that the creator cares for creation. I mean, it only makes sense, right? You know, take one of your children or grandchildren's artworks that they created in school and rip it up in front of them and see how they freak out, right? Can it be that God is freaking out because of how humanity is creating or treating the rest of the creation? Also, there's a moral culture. We ask questions about how we should live. And that's a normal thing in faith communities to do. It's not unusual, like, you know, me trying to bring up those questions around the soccer pitch at my kids' junior soccer team. We also have institutional resources. And, you know, the last two presentations have pointed that out, that churches could access those things, but also churches have institutional resources in their own denominations and so forth. And then we have connections. Sometimes those are local and in communities, but they could also be across national borders. So many of the low-lying island states that are affected by rising sea levels are connected by the Anglican Church, the Catholic Church, to the rest of the global Catholic or Anglican communities. And I know that both those churches in Australia are doing a lot of work to develop fundraising and connections with those low-lying states and Australian citizens. And then again, the history of humanitarian response and concerns about justice. All of these things are opportunities, are things that we can build on to try to promote caring for creation and ecological justice. When we look at adult education, learning practices, and that's actually where my background was, I think that learning for lifestyles to embody caring for creation will need these three things. First of all, they need detail. Second of all, they need a community. And third of all, they need a deeper analysis. So the details include ecologically sound lifestyle practices about caring for creation. And we've gotten a lot of those today. And there's lots more that we can do. But we also need that community, and the storytelling that happened at the beginning of today, I think, is a great example of that. We heard from various churches or social organizations about what they were doing, and we probably got an idea, oh, that relates to my community or my organization. But community is also really important to support the maintenance of an alternate way of living, and living with care for creation is an alternate way of living in our society. Even though we've got a lot more media attention to environmentally friendly practices, we're still embedded in a growth-oriented economy, a fossil fuel-based sense of living and economic systems, a capitalist system, you know, all of those things come in. And so to counter that culture, we need that community which can say to all of us that, hey, you know, you're trying to do good, that's great, and you're on the right track and things like that. And that includes that worldview that will continue to motivate a countercultural action and try to do the things that might meet resistance, but is really good to keep trying to do. And last of all, an analysis of the social structures that inhibit these ecologically caring and just lifestyles. Because it's not just that, you know, there's a few bad apples or a few people who don't want their lifestyles, you know, challenged, or that have, you know, whatever. It's that there are really powerful social structures that really get in the way of trying to do a more environmentally friendly thing. I mean, for example, public transportation. You know, if you live in many cities across Canada, you don't have a good public transportation system. So even if you do want to leave the car at home or go for a car-free lifestyle, the options become very, very limited. And that's an example of a social structure. And this is why we need that theological and sociological analysis of why is change so hard, even though so many people are saying we should do this. I mean, just look at climate change stuff, because we've been talking, we have all the natural science data about what we really need to do, keep it below 2 degrees, probably should keep it at 1.5 degrees increase in global temperature. We're kind of already locked into 2 degrees or higher unless we make some strong changes now. But why has it been so hard, even with decades of that natural science? We need more of the social science, the education, the communications, the political science, and things like that. But we also need the theological analysis about why do people, do what they do and not do what they know that they probably ought to do, and stuff like that. So I want to emphasize that community of support a little bit. And KAIROS is one example of doing that. You're part of a regional group. You are supporting each other. I bet you each of you will come out of today's session feeling like, wow, I got a lot of good stuff out of it. And wow, I feel like I'm part of a movement, a group of people that are trying to do things like I'm trying to do things. So that community of support becomes really, really, really important. And I would say stay involved with those, whether it's the Saskatchewan Environmental Society or the KAIROS Regional Group, or finding like-minded people in your church congregation and things like that. And then in addition, there's an organization called For the Love of Creation, which is a coalition of 36 endorsing organizations, denominations, but also organizations like the Mennonite Central Committee or the Christian Reform World Renew and so forth like that. And they run programs they have resources on their website called Faithful Climate Conversations. And so if you're thinking that there aren't enough people talking about these issues in your congregation, then get one of these going. And I'm going to switch over to a different screen now, if I can do it smoothly. So you should be able to see, I think, a website with resources in the middle. And that's the For the Love of Creation website. And on my screen, it's not showing the URL, but it's fortheloveofcreation.ca/resources. And it should be obvious if you go across it. It seems to be set up well. When I look at websites, a lot of them sort of aren't as intuitive as I think this one is for me. But if you scroll down, there's a number of resources, including these Faithful Climate Conversations. And if you click on one of them, these are guides for small group conversations that you can get going in your congregation. And if you scroll down, you see that it's set up to really help you who may or may not feel like you have a lot of knowledge to be able to lead this. But the point is to have a conversation. You don't have to know a lot of stuff. And before the pandemic, I was given about 25 presentations or workshops a year to different groups. You'd always get some people who'd try to throw something in that would be a little off kilter. Here's a study that I heard about. It's not published in a journal, it's published on the web, but it seems to contest the whole foundation of climate change, for example. And I learned not to go there. Just let's talk about the stuff that we do know, and it isn't just a one-off, but is supported by thousands of studies. And this resource, these Faithful Climate Conversations, help you to do that by giving you a very basic format to focus on. And if I continue to scroll down, you'll see that there are things like little exercises to do with the group, telling stories, which again is really, really important. And then importantly, for those of us who are in the Christian tradition, is to focus on scripture and prayer. And this one in particular has a Hindu prayer because For the Love of Creation is an interfaith organization, but it also has Christian and Hebrew biblical passages. Okay. And then last of all, there's this little climate science introduction, because the point is not to discuss and debate the science. As far as I'm concerned, as a professional or as a researcher in the area, the science is settled. We're just working on little details. And these are some of the facts that are settled. Okay. So I was tasked with telling you a little bit about some of the resources that are available through KAIROS and networks that KAIROS is a part of. And the point is that we are faith-based and we should keep up that approach. We should talk with hope, because hope is the possibility that something can change. And I say that, our God is a God of hope. Okay. So I'm going to end with one last thing. You've seen this character with the goofy teeth and the eyeglasses. And the reason I put this fellow up there is because of this quote from Wendell Berry that comes from a poem that I love called The Mad Farmer's Liberation. And the line is, "Be joyful, though you have considered all the facts." And if you're in a community of support, you can be joyful and hopeful together. You may not be optimistic, but you can still be hopeful and you can still do this work with joy. So there you go. That's what I had to say.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Randy.